There might not be a more red-hot NFL draft prospect right now than Darius Robinson from Mizzou. According to Mel Kiper, he's the fastest rising player there is. He said, quote, "Darius Robinson is red hot right now. He's going to be a player that screams into the top half of the first round and potentially even the top 10. That is pretty hefty praise for a guy who just a couple months ago was seen as a third round pick, and then a year ago was seen as someone who could maybe squeak into the end of the draft class. But for Darius, it has been a crazy journey. He didn't play football till the back half of high school, was a late blooming recruit in 2019, and at one point was buried so deep on the depth chart at Mizzou, his dreams of ever playing in the NFL or getting on the field were pretty much done. But Darius is one of the best stories in this year's draft, as he persevered, helped resurge Mizzou football, and now could be as high as a top 10 pick in this year's draft class. But who the heck is Darius Robinson? In today's video, we're going to take a look at that. As a Mizzou fan, I've been excited to tell this story for a while now, and we're going to go through his high school career, how he became a late bloomer, his meteoric NFL rise, and what the future could look like for him. But before we get started, if you're a big college football fan, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I could cover next. Now let's get started and talk about the insane rise of Darius Robinson. In order to understand how Robinson got to this point, we first need to go back in time. He ended up growing up in Southfield, Michigan, which is a 20-minute drive from Detroit. Football was not always a big thing for him, as baseball was actually his first love. He'd spend his entire Sundays watching 3 baseball games back to back to back, and his attention span would not die off at all. He kept a razor focus on the diamond, and when he played, he was a catcher. While other kids struggled to understand baseball's intricacies, Robinson never had that issue. He was always the best player on the field, and mentally was as sharp as a tack. He was also the biggest player on his team, as whether it was baseball, football, basketball, or soccer, his brother Reginald remembers opposing parents and coaches regularly asking to see his birth certificate. In Little League football, the 8-year-old Robinson led his team in stretches at each practice, and while there was 20 years between him and his brother, they were close, and Reginald always looked out for him. Reginald remembers running into a friend at one of his football games, and he said, quote, "Oh, that's your little brother? Man, he's really good." Up to that point, it hadn't occurred to him just how much better his little brother was than everybody else, but at that moment, a light bulb went off. For high school, he eventually went to Canton Prep, which was a small private school without a football program. Unlike his brother, Darius did think about a future in sports after high school, and at that point, basketball seemed like his best path due to his height and frame. He played his first 2 years of high school there. His biggest contribution on the floor and hoops was his physicality and intensity, the same thing that would make him successful in the football field. His coach said, quote, "A lot of guys, high school basketball players, they all want to shoot. Nobody wants to get in the paint and get dirty and get rebounds. But Darius would take that body and he'd throw it around." Sadly, from a fundamental perspective though, Robinson really wasn't that great of a basketball player. He was fine, but not spectacular. He wasn't good enough to get the kind of offers he was looking for, and by the time his sophomore year came around, he was told he should go back to football. His older brother ended up doing plenty of due diligence, and after finding no red flags, he encouraged his mother to let his brother transfer. His brother said, quote, "I thought it was just a kid being a kid and trying to make his own grown-up decisions. But overall, I felt like, hey, if he wants to play football and this is his opportunity, I was all in for it." When Robinson arrived at Canton High, his coach loved his giant frame. The foundation was there for him to be a big-time football player, but he would need to be molded and carved until he was a polished player. He'd completely proved that wrong, as when he decided to transfer sports, college football wasn't even on his mind. At the time, Canton had several returners on the defensive line, so Robinson didn't even see the field that much his first year. But he would get recruited, as colleges mainly evaluated him because of his size and athleticism. His first Division I offer would end up coming from Toledo, and he'd have 16 more during his junior campaign. His first 2 high major offers would come from Purdue and Iowa State, and in January of 2018, he knew football would be his sport. From there, Robinson would continue to see a spike in his recruitment as he logged 48 tackles, 12 TFLs, 3 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles as a junior. Later on in 2020, Robinson looked back and said, quote, "In high school, you think you have to play your freshman year, your sophomore year, your junior year, and your senior year to get offers, but I got most of my offers after 1 year, and it was shocking for me and my family." Going into his final season, Robinson completely changed both mentally and physically. He was a completely different person, had grown an inch up to 6'5", and he entered his senior season at 240 pounds. But as I said, the difference was more than physical. Mentally, he was ready to go. After playing as a rotational defensive lineman his first year, he was back with renewed focus, and he did as much as he could. He'd end up playing both sides of the ball, as he was both a tight end and a defensive lineman, and he rarely came off the field. He mostly blocked on offense, and his coach regretted not getting him the ball more. In terms of recruiting, he had plenty of offers, but Mizzou would extend their offer in October of 2018, and after that, both Minnesota and Michigan would also offer. Colorado was also in the thick of things, and it came down to the Tigers, the Buffaloes, and the Wolverines. Many were waiting till the first day of the early signing period, and that's when he would announce he was going to sign with Missouri. His coach was shocked as he said, quote, "I had no clue, and Darius has a great poker face." Why would he end up going to Mizzou? Well, he said, quote, "My thought process was Missouri, and they answered all my questions as far as playing in the best conference. I also just felt at home, and I felt so comfortable with the coaching staff." As a senior, Robinson was primarily on the defensive side of the ball, as he had 68 tackles, 6 sacks, and 12 TFLs, with 1 fumble recovery. He's actually projected as a future NFL pick because of his physical traits and his potential. He was seen as a late bloomer, and according to 24/7 Sports, Robinson was a 3-star recruit, the number 6 weak side defensive end, and the 689th best player in the class of 2019. So, how would Darius end up doing at Mizzou? Well, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for Darius there. He would enroll early for the Mizzou Tigers, but his road ahead would be filled with obstacles. In 2019, he would register 1 tackle, and then he would have to endure a coaching change. Eliah Drinkwitz would come in 2020, and despite that, he really wouldn't see the field. He finished with 12 total tackles, and through his first 2 seasons, he really hadn't done much. In 2021, Darius would slowly start to become more of a main player, as he would break out with 24 tackles. In 2022, he'd end up having a much larger role, as he finished with 35 tackles and was starting to get on NFL radars. He was maybe seen as a 7th round pick at best, but that was pretty good for a guy who hadn't done a whole lot his first 3 years. But in times of necessity, good coaches make necessary adjustments. After the 2022 season, both Isaiah McGuire and DJ Coleman had headed off to the NFL, and Mizzou would need some pass rush. Going into his redshirt senior year, Darius would make the move from nose tackle to edge rusher. This was definitely risky, but it would end up paying off. Players with Darius's height and weight simply don't play at the edge very often, and it was a massive risk to his future draft stock, but he stepped up because the team needed it. The switch would turn him into a 1st-round pick. Using all his versatility, he led a dominant Missouri front 7, as he had 14 tackles for loss and 8.5 sacks, while becoming one of the best defenders in the SEC. Mizzou's defense was also insane, and they ended up going to the Cotton Bowl where they beat Ohio State, won over 10 games, and he was the anchor and vocal leader of that defense. In his 5 years at Mizzou, Robinson ended up having 69 tackles, 13 sacks, and 21 tackles for loss. As a Mizzou fan myself, he was definitely the leader of that defense this past year, and many were talking about him being a day 2 selection. The guy went from undrafted to day 2, but his story is not done yet. After putting his team on the map, Robinson had an incredible pre-draft process, and his first stop was at the Senior Bowl in Mobile. He ended up annihilating opposing offensive linemen all week long, and everybody was talking about how he was now a 1st-round pick. That following week, when all the mock drafts were released, you could see Robinson at the tail end of most of the first rounds. It all culminated with that Mel Kiper tweet, who said he could potentially be a top 10 pick when it's all said and done. Robinson seems to be a rare hybrid. He has the size of an interior lineman, but also seems to have the quickness and the ability of an edge rusher. This makes him extremely unpredictable, extremely versatile, and a guy you can plug and play pretty much anywhere. Combine that with his mentality, and I think Darius will be an absolute steal for whatever team drafts him. Robinson said, quote, "I was weak and had to work really hard. I had to learn to love the process and really get myself ready to play. And then each year, I just got better and better." Robinson is honestly one of the best stories in this year's draft. He started out as a basketball player, played football at the end of his high school career, was a late riser in the recruiting process, spent 3 years on the bench, didn't transfer, switched positions, and now could be a top 10 pick. There aren't many stories like that, but if you have one that is similar, please let me know down below. Let me know what you think of Darius Robinson. Let me know another great draft prospect I can cover next. And before you go, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.